funny. Right?
I know you're there.
I mean, we got that so quick. That's awesome. All right, now we can see you. Hi, everybody. So, hi, George.
How are you?
Good.
Live long and prosper.
Amazing. So, George, you began your acting career in the 50s when very few Asian Americans were cast in television and film, and when they were, it was stereotypical roles. What made you ignore those odds and pursue it anyway?
I think it's being so passionately in love with what you want to do, to act. And I had everyone discouraging me because of that rationale. It was a throw of the dice, but I passionately wanted that. But before I did what I wanted to do, I was a good son. My father was in real estate, not unlike your father, yes. When we came out of the internment camp, he had, first of all, a small employment agency to help people find employment, Japanese Americans find employment. And then he found a dry cleaning shop in East LA. So from an all Japanese American environment behind barbed wires to an all Mexican American neighborhood, y por esa razón puedo hablar español. And then he got a grocery store in South Central Los Angeles in an African American community. And he had enough capital within 4 years to buy a 3-bedroom home in our old neighborhood of the Mid-Wilshire district. And he switched to real estate just at that time when Japanese Americans were getting back on their feet and buying homes and businesses. And he encouraged me throughout my childhood. He would take me to some construction project and tell me this is going to be a great luxury hotel. And sure enough, and we looked at the excavation, and that turned into the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Or he would take me downtown and another big excavation. He said this is going to be a major theater center, cultural center. The Opera House is going to be here, and there's going to be a mid-sized theater there, and at the far end would be the larger theater. And that became the Music Center of Los Angeles. And he urged me to become an architect. I think he wanted to put out a sign that said, Takei Real Estate Development, Takei and Son Real Estate Development. And so like a good son, I began my college career up at Berkeley as an architecture student. But after 2 years of being a good son, I wanted to be a good me, true to myself. And I came back down to Los Angeles and had that heart-to-heart conversation with my father. And I said, I want to go to New York and study at the Actors Studio. And I started to sell the Actors Studio, but my father stopped me. He said, I know about the Actors Studio. That's a fine, respected acting school. But when you finish there, they won't give you a diploma that says you're a legitimately educated person. Your mother and I want you to have that. And so if you go to UCLA here in town, they have a fine theater arts department. And when you finish there, they'll give you that diploma. But you're a bullheaded kid. You're going to insist on going to New York. So you have to be prepared to do it all on your own. And remember, New York is a crowded place, a competitive place, and an expensive place. And are you ready to do it all on your own? However, if you go to UCLA in town, you'll have subsidy.
That is a deal-making dad.
Couldn't say no to that.
All about that. I love it.
Yes, I'm sure you do know about that.
So, not so long after that, Star Trek. Before you turned 30, you were cast in Star Trek, right? So, 3 seasons, 6 films, lifetime of impact. And of course, Star Trek was one of the very first multi-ethnic casts on television. And I think you've said that actually you think that diversity of the cast is what made the audience connect to the show for so many decades. Why do you think that the audience for the show was so attracted to that when in fact society at large was not really ready to embrace diversity or wouldn't be for decades?
On many levels. The vision of Star Trek was to see the future in a rather utopian way. And it was set in the year 2300, 300 years ahead. A huge starship soaring through the galaxies on exploratory missions. And Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, had a philosophy that the strength of our society today would be used as, or the Enterprise would be the metaphor for our society today. And the strength of that society is in the best of the diversity coming together. People of different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities, different faiths coming together and contributing their best and working in concert as a team and boldly going where no one had gone before. And that idea, I think, on one level, attracted people because it was a turbulent time. It was a time of the civil rights movement. The nation was in turmoil over the Vietnam War, and there was a Cold War. And we had a Russian as a trusted member of the Enterprise crew. So on that level, it was very attractive to see that our future can be like that. Yeah. But on another level, we said that, so much of science fiction at that time depicted a dystopian society, a ruined society and humans groveling around in the ruins. And apes have taken over, or robots have taken over. Roddenberry's vision was, no, we will prevail. If we have confidence in our problem-solving capacity and our innovative genius and inventive genius, and we can meet all those challenges and ultimately overcome. It was a hopeful future that he depicted at a time when people had a rather cynical view of our future. And so on those levels, Star Trek was a very attractive show, and I think it's still popular today because of those very elements. And next year, Star Trek is going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary.
What are we doing to celebrate?
Well,
we should have a party at the Longacre.
Well, as a matter of fact, we are having a Star Trek night at the Longacre on Halloween night.
Shut up.
The 31st of October.
All right, we are all going to that.
And you can come as who you really are, as Klingons, and come in full regalia, or green-skinned Andorian slave girls, or Starfleet officers. You can quit being conservative and being a member of American society today and come as your true selves. And we're going to enjoy our Star Trek night.
All right, we are totally doing that. I love it. Now, you've actually said that the global community you've built on social media is in some ways fulfilling Gene Roddenberry's vision that you're talking about. How so?
Well, now it literally is a global community that we have. I used to call, it the town square where people with opinions could drag out their soapbox and get on and share their opinion. I was impressed when I first went to London. They have a speaker's corner, at the northeast corner of Hyde Park. And you have college professors as well as crazies, you know, pontificating there.
Those are the choices.
Well, that's, you know, that's another kind of diversity.
Yeah.
And it was a healthy thing for a community to have that. But now it's global. And we have people from Prague, Australia chiming in, or Singapore chiming in, or Beijing chiming in. Well, not so easily from Beijing. And so it's a wonderful, but also a wonderful opportunity to share ideas and thoughts, but there's also the downside of that too, as there always have been. You know, we have our underbelly in our society, and that is given the same opportunity.
Sure.
So you got to use it with a good judgment, knowing who to respond to and who to put in that category.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, in addition to the king of Facebook, as we said, you've been called the funniest guy on Facebook, building your huge following through humor. Before social media, was making people laugh a way to connect for you?
It is, because, you know, sometimes if you get too finger waggling, you know, you turn people off. And what you want to do with your finger waggling is to get them to stop and listen and perhaps consider your point of view. And how you get them to do that is by humor. You disarm them with humor. For example, there is, I think he got unelected, but there was a state senator in Tennessee who wanted to criminalize teachers for using the word gay. Now, teachers are working with young people at a point in their lives when they're making discoveries about themselves, coming to some realization. And it's important that teachers be able to give them guidance and counsel fully. And if you're saying that you can't use the word gay, and if you do, you're going to be thrown in jail for a week and fined $300, it's destructive. And so you can really get intense and finger waggle at that state senator. But then I thought, well, my name is pronounced Takei, although it frequently gets mispronounced. Takei rhymes with gay. So if it's
handy,
very handy. If you can't use the word gay, then substitute it with Takei. And march in a Takei pride parade.
I totally love that. I'm gonna start saying I'm Takei.
Well, I did a documentary
married.
film called To Be Takei.
Yes.
And we can all be Takei.
Come on in. So you have said about social media, celebrities often focus on their daily lives, but here's the thing about social media. It ain't about you. Fans don't care what you're eating, where you're shopping, or what products you have to sell. So on the one hand, you have totally proven that right on your social accounts. On the other hand, let's say Kim Kardashian has over 26 million Facebook followers and basically posts all about what she's wearing, where she's shopping, and what products she has to sell. So square that for us.
Well, I have a different purpose. I want to communicate ideas and comment on social or political issues. And so it's not, all these issues are not really about me. It's ultimately about us. And so I talk about us as a community. Just as in Star Trek, you know, we were a team. And my larger team is my friends out there. And by talking about us, we have a genuine conversation about substantial issues, and sometimes, you know, light issues that we talk about lightly.
Well, to that, you've said, I love this. Fans come for the cat memes and they stay for the activism. I dig it. And of course, one of your primary areas of activism is LGBTQ equality. Now, in 2005, you and your now husband, Brad, were, hi, Brad.
Well, there you are.
So in 2005, you and Brad had been together for over 20 years when Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed same-sex marriage legislation, prompting you to speak out in the press for the first time publicly as a gay man. There had been, of course, many moments of anti-gay legislation, anti-gay vetoes before then. So what was it about this moment and this action that compelled you?
It was those series of experiences that kept building up and building up and building up. And by 2005, I looked back at my career and I said, I've had a good career. I've enjoyed it. It could have been better, but I feel now it's time. It's time because the clock is ticking and I have to use whatever time I have left. And I didn't want to live that rest of the time with my guard up all the time, which I had to do as a closeted actor. And so Brad and I had that discussion, particularly because I was so angry about Arnold Schwarzenegger's veto. And on that night, we were at home watching the news, and we saw young people pouring out onto Santa Monica Boulevard, venting their rage. And we felt the same way, but we were comfortable at home. And I felt like I wasn't really being responsible, ultimately to myself. And we decided, all right, I'm prepared for my career to go on the downhill side. Let's make that move. And I came out and blasted Arnold Schwarzenegger's veto.
And actually, relative to your career, the reverse of your fear happened.
Exactly.
Why do you think that was?
The polar opposite. The times had changed. The California legislature was passing marriage equality bills, and it was Schwarzenegger that squelched it. But the world was changing, or at least the United States was changing. Massachusetts already had marriage equality. It came through the courts. Yes, bravo to you, Bostonians.
In the house.
You led the way, and thank you for that. It was changing, and although I was prepared for my career to wane, I started getting a lot of guest shots on TV series, not as a character, as a character, but named George Takei, and a gay George Takei.
At that.
I had a new identity, and so I was working more and doing that sort of thing, and then that phone call came from Howard Stern. And I think that too was because I had come out and been vocal, and I got that invitation to be his official announcer. And Brad and I had to talk about that too. Do we really want to go on that show? But then we figured Howard has a vast listenership, and it's that vast listenership that we want to get to. I've been speaking at colleges and other events, but I was essentially talking to members of the club and their allies. We needed to get the other people who I maintain are also decent, fair-minded people, and get them to start thinking about equality for everybody. And it's a big gamble, but by going on the Howard Stern show, it's going to extract a price. But nevertheless, we will be reaching those people that we want to reach, the people that are too busy pursuing, making a living, and not thinking about other issues. But they listen to Howard. And through Howard, maybe we can get some understanding from that vast, fair-minded middle. And so I decided, we'll agree to do that. And as it turned out, Howard was seen by the public generally at that time as a homophobe, but he is not. he turned out to be a great champion for us. And he did get that large middle class to rethink. And so we were able to really be much more effective by going on the Howard Stern show, although it extracted a huge price from us. Brad was, when I came home from one of the shows, he wouldn't talk to me. I got the cold treatment, the silent treatment.
Brad, do you want to come up here and respond to this? Look, this is the 92nd Street Y. I'm sure there's like 7 psychiatrists. Where are you? We are well covered.
Well, he felt very well uncovered by my Howard Stern appearances.
Got it.
And so there was a price I had to pay. I took him to various special places like the Boathouse for dinner to win him back.
All right, well, that works. And here he sits today, so a happy ending.
Happy ending.
So you have said of coming out, it's not really coming out, which suggests opening a door and stepping through. It's more like a long, long walk through what began as a narrow corridor that starts to widen. I love that. What is it about that metaphor rather than the metaphor of the closet that makes more sense for you?
From the time that I was in my late teens and early 20s, I knew who I was. And even from before then, I would go to the newsstand right off of Hollywood Boulevard. It's a half a block long newsstand. They had every periodical. And I would go to the muscle magazine areas, and make sure that no one's watching and peer through them. And when someone I recognized came down the street, I would get Time magazine and be flipping through that.
Reading for the articles.
Reading through the articles.
Got it.
Playboy,
Just for the
reading
article.
the interviews. But at that newsstand, at the far end, tucked behind, I discovered the Mattachine Society's publication. And this was back in the 50s.
Wow.
And I thought, there are other people like me, and they're organized. And that was a little light in that dark corridor. And then you meet other people, and that's more light coming in. And so it's a lifetime of walking down that narrow, dark corridor that gets brighter and brighter with more lights coming in as you walk down, and the corridor becomes wider. And then you discover gay bars, and you make more friends, and it becomes wider. And finally, we were at that point where society was starting to change, and it was becoming a wide and quite brightly lit corridor. And so you finally, step through. So the word coming out of the closet suggests that there's an immediate change. It's a long, long, gradual process.
I like that very much. Now, as far as we've come, actors in particular still struggle with whether to come out and what it will do to their careers. What would you advise young actors today?
Well, we've made tremendous advances. There are so many gay actors out now. And so I think it's more comfortable now for young actors to be who they really are than it was when I was a young beginning actor. There are certain roles where you still have difficulty being considered for casting by producers and directors. If it's that of an action adventure film and you're the action hero, or a romantic lead, they want you to be the image that women or girls would swoon over. So those people still have difficulty, but it's even there, it's changing, particularly amongst singers. So, it's not an overnight process. It takes a long time. And I'm sure we'll get to that point eventually where we can have gay action stars or gay leading men who are wonderful actors and can compel credibility. I think that day is coming, and I think it will be not too far off in the future. I intend to be alive then to experience that.
You and I will go to the movie theater and we will watch.
You have a longer path to go than mine is kind of limited. Although I must say, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was a dynamic old lady until 104. So I'm hoping I have her genes in me.
Mine's almost 94 and she's right there.
Well, she's an award winner.
Amen. So during your 2006 equality trek with the Human Rights Campaign, you likened the experience of being denied marriage equality to the internment. You said, "Here today, my partner and I feel the same kind of imprisonment." Can you talk to me about that connection?
Well, we were incarcerated right after Pearl Harbor for what we looked like. And we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And the nation was swept up in war hysteria. And their psyches had been shaped by the stereotypes that had been implanted in people's minds, either cold-hearted, evil villains, or quiet, silent, obsequious servants, or comic buffoons, all very unattractive stereotypes. We were painted with a broad brush. And with the LGBT community, it was these flamboyant, over-the-top, exaggerated cartoons that they perceived gay people to be, gay LGBT people to be. And the fact is, we were bankers, theater producers, doctors, people in all walks of life. And yet we were seen as that one stereotype, as we were right after Pearl Harbor. We were American citizens, born, raised, educated here. My mother was born in Sacramento. My father was a San Franciscan, and yet we happen to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And there's an element of political leadership as well. In California, we had an attorney general who obviously knew the Constitution and the law, but he was an ambitious attorney general. He wanted to run for governor, and he saw that the single most popular issue was the get rid of the Japs movement. And so he got in front of it and became an outspoken advocate for getting rid of the Japs. He made this amazing statement. We have no reports of any sabotage activity, any spying, or any fifth column activity by the Japanese Americans. And that is ominous because they are inscrutable. That was the other stereotype. You don't know what they're thinking. And so we got to lock them up before they do anything. So for him, the absence of evidence was the evidence. And he became very, very forceful in advocating that. And that was also the kind of pressure that President Roosevelt had to deal with. And we had the internment. But he became very popular, became the governor of California, and was reelected twice. The only governor to serve 3 terms until Jerry Brown, the current governor, was elected. And then during his 3rd term, he was appointed to be the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Can you guess who he was? Earl Warren, the great liberal Chief Justice of the United States, was the fiery advocate of getting rid of innocent people simply because of our race. So, my father, when I was a teenager, I was curious about the internment, and he was explaining to me our democracy. This is years after we were released. He said, our democracy is a people's democracy. And it can be as great as a people can be, but it is also as fallible as people are. And so our democracy is dependent on people who cherish the ideals of our democracy to be actively engaged in the process and hold democracy's feet to the fire to make it a truer democracy. And he was the one that really got me to be an activist, and he took me downtown to the Adlai Stevenson for President headquarters. He was a great admirer of Governor Stevenson. And he used to like to say, we volunteered for the Stevenson campaign, but actually, he volunteered me. And I discovered electoral politics and how important that is, but also how much fun it is working with equally passionate people, working for a man or a woman that we admire and we think is going to give us the leadership that's needed. And that's why, as we approach an election season, it's so important for good people to really study the candidates, and then beyond that, to actively engage in getting the good people elected. And beyond that, to volunteer and serve on campaigns. And beyond that, take time from your life and serve on public commissions and boards. That's part of the importance of our democracy. It's very fragile, and it's dependent all on us.
I'm so struck by what you've shared. Your father talked to you about our democracy. Given the truly horrible things that the fallible people did to him and his family, how do you think he was able to keep his faith in this democracy?
I'm still to this day amazed, because he had everything taken from him that he had built up to the middle of his life in his 30s with a wife and 3 young children, and to have all that taken away, and yet he was able to keep his faith in the basic fundamental ideals of our democracy. I owe so much to my father, because there are so many people that either became embittered or stultified, silent, stony. There are so many young Japanese Americans, younger than me, who know that dad and mom or grandpa and grandma were in camp, that's the term, but that's all they knew. And we did Allegiance in San Diego at the old Globe Theater first, and these young Japanese, by young I mean people under 50. From my vantage point, they're young. You're a youngster. They came up to me and said, I never knew about the internment. My parents were interned, or my grandparents were interned, and that's all I knew. I learned about the anguish and the pain and the terror of uncertainty for the first time seeing the musical Allegiance, and thank you. So younger Japanese Americans are learning about their own family history through a musical. And that was so fulfilling for me to hear, that we are making that kind of contribution. I think it's an important American story that all Americans should know. It was an egregious violation of our Constitution and basic human rights. But for Japanese Americans to learn something about their own family history is a very fulfilling thing for me to realize.
Yeah, there are so many other shameful parts of our national history that are taught so much more in classes, books, and dramatized on television and film and theater. Why, but not this part of our history? Why do you think that has been?
Well, for one thing, as I said, Japanese Americans, the younger Japanese Americans, don't really know the story. And we are at fault to an extent, because Asian American parents want their children to go into the safe kind of areas. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, college professors, or architects. And if their children have some interest or passion for the arts, musician or painting, they say, that's all right, that's good for to have culture. But when they want to go into it as a profession, as their career, their life, they outright discourage. They not even say, well, go ahead. They discourage them. And so we didn't have the writers and the singers and the artists to venture forth. And if they did, they stayed in the safe areas, dealing with safe subjects. And I think it's important that, as my father said, you have to be actively engaged in the process of democracy. And we have had an experience with democracy, and we need to deal with that issue. And from, I think, this time on, we will see many Asian American artists, writers, composers, lyricists, directors. As a matter of fact, Allegiance is directed by a Japanese Canadian whose father was incarcerated in the Canadian internment camps. And we have people in our cast whose families were incarcerated. I'm the only one my age in Allegiance, and they're all younger people, and they've not had that experience, but their families have had that experience. So I am very hopeful, in fact optimistic, that this story will be dealt with in many, many different forms, written by or directed by or acted by people who have that internment experience as their family heritage.
Now, the form you've chosen for Allegiance is musical theater. Why was that the way to tell your story?
Well, it was fortuitous. Brad and I come to New York. Our residence is in Los Angeles, but we're theater people, and we come to New York, and for a short period of time, we see theater every night. And one night, we went to see Forbidden Broadway. We got there nice and early, we were seated, and two guys came in and sat in front of me, and one of them recognized my voice. And they turned around.
Really?
And so we chit-chatted before the show began, and then during the intermission we chit-chatted some more, and we went back. Brad and I went back to our apartment saying, "Oh, those guys are real passionate theater lovers." The next night we went to see In the Heights by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And we arrived at the theater, and this time it was quite filled, and we had aisle seats, and we looked down the aisle, and we saw two arms waving at us. It was the two same guys. The night before, they were right in front of us, and the next night, they're in the same row. And we sat down, and I said, "Isn't that a strange coincidence? Those same guys are in the same row." And Brad whispered to me, "I think they're stalking us."
The thought occurred.
Well, it was at that, near this end of the first act, the Puerto Rican father who loves his family and his daughter, who's very talented, wants to go to college, but can't afford to send her to college, sings this moving song, Inútil, useless. And that song moved me because it reminded me of my father's anguish in the camps. Here he had 3 children, and whatever decision he made was going to affect their future. And he felt that responsibility, but at the same time, he couldn't do anything radical in the interest of his children's future. And I'm a weeper. I was bawling. And then the intermission comes and the lights go on, and the 2 guys came clambering over knees to chat with us, and I'm quickly drying my face. And one of the 2, the Asian guy, said, why did that song hit you so deeply? And I told him about my father and his sharing with me. Well, that Asian guy turned out to be Jay Kuo, the composer lyricist, and the Caucasian guy with him was an Italian immigrant, Lorenzo Teone, who is now our lead producer and one of the co-writers of Allegiance. And Jay is an enormously gifted musician, I discovered. At first, I didn't know who he was, just theater lovers. But we chatted then during the intermission about the internment experience, and then we went out for drinks the night following. After the theater, and then we went out for dinner the following night, and we talked about it. And the idea of doing a musical, we bought because I'm a musical theater fan too. And when he said music penetrates into the heart, it hits the emotions, we agreed. But we didn't know what kind of, how good a musician he was. And they went back to San Francisco and we went back to Los Angeles. But I kept up an email correspondence with Jay. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, he sent a song over titled Allegiance. And there I was at my computer, bawling away again. Alas, that song is not in this version. The only song that's still remaining from the original reading is a song titled Gamang, which is a Japanese word that means endure and with dignity, endure with fortitude. It's a powerful song, and that's what made the resilience of the Japanese American people possible in the internment camps. And that also talks about, being able to find joy under these harsh conditions. That's an important part of resilience. People found joy, friendship, love, got married, and many people were born in the internment camps. And that's what our musical is about, finding that love. And we have two loves. One, a dangerous, forbidden love. Sammy, the young man, falls in love with the army nurse, a white woman. An interracial affair behind barbed wire fences during the Second World War. His sister, Lea Salonga, glorious voice, wonderful actress, falls in love with a young law student who was yanked out of school and is imprisoned. And when they come to draft us, after they had rejected us initially after the Pearl Harbor bombing, he takes great umbrage with that. He becomes a leader of the resistors, and the sister, in love with him, becomes one of the leaders of the resistors, thus fracturing that family, symbolically showing the fracturing of the Japanese American community. And so that story is told in music, and I discovered that Jay is an extraordinarily gifted musician. He's fluent in so many musical languages. He captures, certainly it's a Broadway play, and these soaring love songs that transport you or break your heart. He captures the rhythms of the pop rhythms of the 1940s, the big band sound and the bebop sound. He also captures the sound of Japanese folk tunes. In fact, I sing one of them with Lea Salonga. A duet with Lea Salonga.
How's that for a Broadway debut?
My Broadway debut, and I'm singing a duet.
Well, if you're gonna do it, do it.
I am blessed. Life is amazing, and they keep surprising you. And I'm surprising myself. I'm a shower singer, and she's a Tony-winning, internationally fabled megastar.
And together you make duet.
A duet.
Love this.
It's
so
magic.
That first connection that you talked about with In the Heights, that was almost 10 years ago. So in these years of developing the show, what do you understand about your family and your father now that you maybe didn't when you began working on the show?
On the show? About my father?
Or your family and your experience?
Well, I begin to appreciate more their sacrifices, their strength. My mother was a strong lady from way back, from the time that we were in. Do you know that she, we could take into camp only what we could carry. What was forbidden was anything sharp, anything mechanical, and we couldn't take our pets. And yet my mother had a brand new portable sewing machine full of sharp ends and very mechanical. She didn't want to give it up. She wrapped it up in baby blanket, my baby sister's blanket, and sweaters, and covered it up with Cracker Jack boxes and animal cookies for us, and put it in that duffel bag. And she marched past those armed MPs carrying that, and my father didn't know about it either. She smuggled in a sewing machine into the camps.
Wow.
And we were in 2 of them. And so, I knew my mother was a tough lady from way back then. My father was initially struck paralyzed by it. And he was really stoic on that train ride, I remember. But once we got to the Arkansas camp, he realized that we can't be within ourselves. And he, it's in the swamps of Arkansas, and when it rained, the whole camp turned into a swamp, a muck. And we had to make that trek to the mess hall 3 times a day. Elderly people could not make it. Their feet would sink into the muck, and they couldn't pull their feet out. And young men had to carry them to the, and so he organized a team of men to build a boardwalk connecting all the barracks to the mess hall and to the latrine, 2 essential areas that we had to go to. And so I saw my father grow in strength in the camp, faced with the challenges. And then after we were released, we were released with only a one-way ticket to any place in the United States that we wanted to go to, and $25. We would start our new lives with $25. And I saw him work his fingers, well, both my parents, to the bones at all those early businesses that they were in. I saw them struggle. At the cleaner shop, I remember waking up to we had a little apartment behind the cleaner shop, to the sound of the steam press, thump, shh, thump, thump, shh, thump. And I went to sleep hearing that same sound. He got very little sleep. And then the grocery store, because my parents felt we can let the children eat wholesale. So it was a practical decision. But I saw them work and sacrifice, and it affected their health. I am so grateful to them for doing that. And so I see my parents as very strong people who rose to the challenges of occasion. They didn't succumb to bitterness or to stoicism. And I gave my father a hard time too as a teenager, because I was curious about my childhood incarceration, and I tried to find something about it in books, history books and civics books, and couldn't find anything about it. So I engaged my father in conversation after dinner, and he was one of those people that did talk about it. And that's why I knew what I know about the incarceration. But I was also an idealistic kid, inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King and I was active in the civil rights movement. And some of our discussions became very, very heated. And there is no one more arrogant than an idealistic teenager. During one of the discussions, I said to my father, "You led us like sheep to slaughter, taking us into the internment camp." And the conversation suddenly stopped. He was silent for the longest time, and I knew I had hit a nerve, and I felt terrible. And then he said, "Maybe you're right." And he got up, went into his bedroom, and closed the door. I had hurt this man who suffered so much and had been such an amazing father to us. And I felt awful. But he closed the door. And so I thought, well, I'll apologize tomorrow in the morning. And when morning came, it was awkward, and I never did. And as the time passes, it becomes even more awkward. And now I can't. And it's haunted me all my life. And in many ways, I see allegiance as my apology to my father for having said what I said then.
What do you think he'd say if he could see the show?
I think he would be so proud. And you know, a couple of months ago, the marquee went up on the Longacre Theater. And I was so moved by that, because it's really my parents' story that makes up Allegiance. And I felt my father and my mother both were there. And I said to Brad, my parents would be so proud. This moment is coming. And in 2 weeks, we'll be performing for an audience, a paying audience. And so you'll be helping me apologize to my father.
We'll all be there.
Thank you.
We'll all be there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Shall we take some of your questions, team? I know, right? We need a breath. That was amazing. Thank you. Lorraine, via Facebook, can you identify a meaningful way for the U.S. to atone for its internment of Japanese Americans?
I think it's an amazing commentary about the United States and our democratic government. In the 70s, a movement started to get an apology and redress for that unconstitutional incarceration. Congress created a congressional commission, and I was one of the many that testified at that commission hearing. And it took a long time, but in 1988, President Reagan, on behalf of the United States government and the American people, formally apologized to Japanese Americans for that incarceration and pledged a $20,000 token redress. It was a long fight. There was a lot of opposition. Politicians claimed that our budget can't take it, we can't afford it. But it was much less than what they spent to get us imprisoned, build those camps, transport us, feed us during those 4 years. And it was a noble way of a great, confident government to recognize that. Because there are so many governments yet today that can't own up to their history, and we can't move ahead. Last year, the U.S. State Department asked me to go on a speaking tour to South Korea and Japan, because they are our two strongest, most important allies in the Pacific, and yet they can't get along because of their common history. Japan had colonized South Korea for the longest time, and it was a brutal colonization. And there's been only a kind of a pro forma apology. And the Koreans have found the issue of the comfort women, and they're still immobilized in history. They can't come to grips, as the United States did with the apology in 1988. And we need to get them to work together for our American interest as allies of our interests in the Pacific. And so I think the fact that Ronald Reagan in 1988, on behalf of the government, was able to apologize makes a great commentary about the bigness, the confidence, and the nobility of our government and our people, the American people.
Well, speaking of the American people, this is a question from our audience. What's your take on the whole Kim Davis flap?
Ah, yes. The religious
Well, we're going to
freedom.
get into it. Here we go.
She is an official of the government entrusted to issue marriage licenses. The Supreme Court ruled that we have marriage equality now. It was a long struggle to get to that point, but it is the rule of the land from coast to coast, from border to border. We have what's called the First Amendment in our Bill of Rights. It speaks about the freedom of religion. We have that freedom of religion, and government protects everyone's freedom of religion, and therefore government will not take sides. We will not have a government-endorsed religion, because we're a diverse nation of many faiths, and what's important is mutual respect. And this woman who has that job is using the power entrusted to her by the government and given that civil responsibility for her own personal religious beliefs. It's unconstitutional to do that, because the Constitution clearly, in the First Amendment, the freedom of religion clause of the First Amendment, gives her the power of the government, but not to use it for her personal religious faith. It's like a vegetarian getting a job in a steakhouse and refusing to serve meat. I mean, it's as ridiculous as that. She has a government job, and that job is to do a certain job, issue marriage licenses. That is legal, and the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled so. So she's getting, she had to go to jail for that, and she came out and she insisted that, all right, well, my deputies have issued those licenses, but it doesn't have my signature, so it's not legal. Well, that was taken to court, and she failed there too. What she should do is to do what's right, what's just, resign from that job, and let people who can do. And she can freely practice her religion with herself and her family, but not use the government's power to inflict it on everybody.
Okay. So here's a question from Carl Ellison. Hello, Carl.
Where are you, Carl?
There he
there,
is.
I
Hey,
see an
Carl.
arm waving.
Okay, science fiction used to be used to discuss taboo topics. that society wouldn't deal with openly. Are there any taboo topics left?
Well, I talked very positively about Star Trek and how we talked about diversity being the strength. I had a very quiet and protected conversation with Gene Roddenberry on that subject. We've dealt with many issues. We dealt with the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War. And this was at a party at his home, a poolside party, but this was at the far end of the pool where I had this conversation just with Gene. And he said, I've been walking a tightrope with Star Trek, dealing with these issues back in the 1960s. And I need to keep the show on the air in order to be able to address these issues. We had a groundbreaking episode in which Captain Kirk kisses Uhura, an African-American woman being kissed by a white man. It was a very controversial episode. It was not aired by the southern stations in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. It was our lowest rated episode. And he said, I have to keep the show on the air in order to tell the stories and deal with the issues that I do on Star Trek. And that would mean, if I dealt with the gay issue, it would probably mean cancellation, death for the series. And I understood that because I was closeted at that point. And I spoke as a concerned liberal with Gene Roddenberry, although I think he has his suspicions. And so I understood why we had to be that way. And even today now, with our feature film version, and Paramount is preparing a feature film for next year to celebrate our golden anniversary. Yes, we're going to be back. But they still don't deal with that issue. And so I think it's going to take a bit more time for even science fiction to be able to deal with the many unspoken issues yet.
We'll stay on Star Trek for a question from David. Of all the Star Trek cast, who was the funniest or had the most unique sense of humor?
I think it was Jimmy Doohan, who played Scotty. And he was a great drinking buddy as well.
That's handy.
As a matter of fact, he told me he's really an Irish Canadian from Vancouver, but he's made a career playing a Scotsman. And he said, well, I qualify because I've drunk enough of the libation of Scotland. And he did qualify.
Continuing, we have a question from John. What was it like to work with Leonard Nimoy?
We lost Leonard earlier this year, and he was a real loss. Many of us called him the conscience of Star Trek. He was really an extraordinary man and self-sacrificing. After we were canceled, Star Trek was bought by an animation firm who wanted to do Star Trek as an animated series. And initially I thought that was a great idea. With the animation form, you can really create fantastical alien beings, like those underwater gossamer creatures, which we couldn't do with live television, or fantastical civilizations, soaring cities, etc. But to do the voices, they claimed to have a very limited budget, and they cast Bill Shatner to do Captain Kirk, Leonard Nimoy to do Mr. Spock, and Jimmy Doohan to do Scotty and all the male voices, and Majel Barrett, who played Nurse Chapel, to do Nurse Chapel and all the female voices. When Leonard found out about that, he said, this isn't right, because Star Trek is about diversity. And the two people who most represent diversity on our cast are Nichelle Nichols and George Takei. And if they're not going to be a part of this, it's not going to be Star Trek as I know it. And I'm not interested in doing it. He risked his own job, something very rare for an actor to do. He was prepared to not do that because Nichelle and I were not doing Sulu and Uhura. And because he was, Leonard was so essential for the role of Spock that they found the money to hire the two of us. Alas, Walter Koenig wasn't included, but because Leonard pressured them, he was given the opportunity to write a script for one of the episodes. And he was a good political compatriot for me as well. He was the only one on the show that really discussed issues. You know, we'd have set-side conversations, and we worked together on common causes, common candidates that we supported, and he was a very supportive friend. When I did Equus in Los Angeles, and Leonard did it on Broadway. It was first played by, I think, Tony Perkins, and then it was followed by Richard Burton, and then somebody else before Leonard did it. And Leonard was the last to do it on Broadway. But the ushers came backstage to tell me that Leonard Nimoy came. And suddenly I got very nervous. Leonard, who did it on Broadway and got wonderful reviews, was in the house. But after the show, Leonard came backstage grinning, and I said, "Well, Leonard, what'd you think?" And he said, "You are better," which is preposterous. But that's the kind of guy he was. And he drove all the way down from Los Angeles to see Allegiance in San Diego. And the whole cast was so thrilled by that. And we had a whole cast photo taken with Leonard. And he had indicated that he'll come to see it on Broadway. And that's one of the other hurts, disappointments that I have about this production, that Leonard won't be there to support it. He was a very good supportive friend, a dear friend.
There in spirit.
He'll be there, yeah, together with my parents.
Mm-hmm. I'll take a point of privilege and ask the last question. So as we've discussed, you are an actor, an author, a social justice activist, a social media superstar. Of all of these roles, is there one that you identify most closely with? One that you hope you'll be remembered most for?
My biggest passion is still acting and the theater. And this is a dream come true. It can actually happen. You know, I came to New York for the first time in December of 1960. And I wrote back home to my parents and friends that I was staying at the Sloan House. I didn't tell them that it was the 34th Street YMCA. It sounded wonderful, Sloan House. I came here chasing the opportunity to do Broadway. Never happened. I did off-Broadway. But now, at this age, I'm getting this opportunity. And it's a dream which I thought would never happen coming true. And I am so gratified. And thank you for the support that you've all already indicated. Lea Salonga. I mean, she's... And I get to sing a duet with her in my debut production on the internment, one of my missions in life. And at 78 years old. So, you know, dreams can come true, and it's important for all of us to have our dreams and work toward achieving it. It can happen. A kid that grew up behind barbed wire fences on Broadway, taking my vows. Incredible. Only in America. On Broadway. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, George Takei.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jordan, thank you.
So great.